When Mista decided to shoot off Pesci's fingers, did anybody else think of Buster Scruggs? I thought of Buster Scruggs. Greetings, my friends. It's time to dive into another wacky and super violent episode of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure Golden Wind, an episode which sees all of our characters stowing away on a key, which is inside of a turtle, which is on a train. And we also get to see more of Mista in action, who might as well be the main character of the series at this point. And I'm kind of okay with that, as Mista is really my favorite character from the show. He kind of gives me these Jean-Pierre Polnareff vibes, that character from Stardust Crusaders, where he ended up getting most of the screen time. Most episodes ended up being dedicated to him, and it seems like all the worst things always end up happening to that character. That's exactly what's going on with Mista in this episode, as he's been captured by Pesci and his stand, which goes by the name of the Beach Boy. They called it the Fisherman in the previous episode, but some of my commenters corrected me, and of course you can clearly hear him saying, Beachy Boy! I said in the last episode that his stand is really creepy looking, and it really is in this episode too, as you get to see the actual hook sort of embedding itself into his arm, working its way up, going up into his head, and almost directly into his fucking brain. It's a pretty horrifying ability, and to be perfectly honest with you, I'm not really sure how you can properly escape it without having some sort of help from someone. But Mista, of course, is such a freaking awesome and strategic fighter that he's actually able to figure out what Pesci is doing. Pesci is also able to fall prey to the Grateful Dead's abilities, which means he always has to have some ice on hand. And throughout most of this episode, you can even see that he's always chewing on an ice cube. But Mista actually figures out what he's doing, and he's able to use his Sex Pistols, firing them repeatedly through the entire train, until eventually they find his glass, which is filled with ice. He decides to use that to destroy it, giving him the opportunity to start sucking in that Grateful Dead dust and transforming into a creepy old man. But it gives Mista the opportunity to finally attack, and he proceeds by shooting off the dude's fingers, which is such a fucking cool scene. I especially love the creativity of how the Sex Pistols were used, although I have to admit that I do think it's a little strange that they just sort of randomly change size from time to time. I mean, sometimes they're incredibly microscopic, and other times they're the size of a fucking amiibo. That being said, it didn't take away from any of the coolness, and it also led to one of the biggest surprises of the episode, where suddenly both Pesci and Mista are being bothered by this old man. But if you actually recognized the character's haircut from the previous episode, you would know almost instantaneously that this was Prosciutto, who actually allows himself to age, and he can also de-age himself at practically any time. It's a unique ability of being able to use his stand, and he's able to use this in a number of cool ways to get the edge on Mista, and it almost seems as if he straight up kills him in this episode, as he's able to make him rapidly age. He takes his very own gun and puts 3 directly into his head. It was so anticlimactic that I had a feeling that he probably wasn't going to be killed here, but if they actually did decide to kill Mista in that moment, that would have been a pretty bold decision. But it's in this moment that Mista's essentially out of the battle, and then you have Prosciutto and Pesci who decide to go and find this mysterious object that Bruno bought on board. It was probably going to be the biggest clue to actually finding them. And I think one of the most fun things about this entire scenario is simply just watching Prosciutto bitch slap Pesci around because he just takes advantage of the fact that he's a complete and utter fucking moron. It also is just so hilariously homoerotic that you just can't help but laugh about it. And I don't mean that in an offensive way, I just think it's really funny that Prosciutto basically treats Pesci like his very own personal bitch. Eventually, they go into the control room, and they do end up finding this turtle, which has actually been sort of making its way into the interiors of the train, and this immediately leads to a big confrontation where they realize that there's someone who's actually not there, and that just so happens to be Bruno Bucciarati, and I'm glad that we finally got to see him in action again, because he was a character that I thought they used in the beginning, and then they just sort of, forgot about him for a little bit. He's always been in the story, and he's such an important member of the group, so getting to see him in action is fun, and his zipper abilities are always fun to see, because again, they're very creative in the way that they're actually used. I especially love that even though it looks like Mista is dead, this has actually all been a part of his crazy plan, or maybe it was actually his stand which was working on its very own. That itself is debatable. We get to learn that one of these Sex Pistols was actually inside of his hat and was able to sort of stop these bullets from completely penetrating his brain, and they were able to sort of bring him back to life with some ice, and they even managed to bring in some of those bullets to help out Bruno Bucciarati in the battle as well. Bruno also effortlessly just takes out Pesci in such a great way by not even using stand powers, but just by like Falcon kicking the dude right in the side of the head, slamming him right into some glass, and that leads to a really great final confrontation. I love how Bruno is able to use his zipper powers where like he's about to be hit by a big attack, but he just uses a zipper that goes down completely across his face, allowing him to dodge just about any single ability, and he decides to go through a last-ditch effort move where it looks like he's going to open up a zipper on the side of the train, grab Prosciutto, and just jump out directly with him, taking him out in the process. This is probably not going to happen, and I don't see Bruno going down like that, but man, that was fucking cool. What's the rundown on this episode of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure Golden Wind? I think it's time for a JoJo pose. Pesci and Prosciutto are some really tough customers, but they just do not stand a chance against Bruno Bucciarati and his boys. They always have such unique strategies when it comes to taking down these villains, and again, that's always been sort of like the highlight of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, is that every single confrontation and battle is not just your standard fist fight. There's always that moment where you're waiting for that character to sort of reveal what they've been trying to do the entire time, that secret ability, or just a variation on what they've actually done before, and Mista was certainly a pleasant surprise in this episode. He's always really fun to watch because his power seems so stock. He can basically just reflect bullets, but the way that he's able to utilize the Sex Pistols in this episode is so unique, and they did it in ways that I honestly didn't even think were possible. It shows that we've really only scratched the surface when it comes to actually seeing what these powers are. Bruno, of course, in this episode was also just great. He's just such an elaborate and fun-looking character, and seeing the sticky fingers finally arrive was just so damn satisfying, and battling against the Grateful Dead, which had such a weird, monstrous Resident Evil Cthulhu look to it. I don't know, I just really love the way that that entire sequence was animated with all three of these characters in this very small space and being able to utilize it in a number of really awesome ways. It was also just really cool finally getting to see Prosciutto like basically get knocked down a peg or two, and it's only a matter of time until that all comes to a close in the next one, but they still have Pesci on the train, they still gotta worry about the Beach Boy, so we're gonna have to see how all that's going to wrap up. What I will say is this was another grand addition to Golden Wind and another really super awesome and fun episode. Can't wait to see how it's all gonna wrap up in the next one as we move on to the next big part of the story. I'm giving this episode, wait for it, a 5 out of 5. Yes, another 5 out of 5. I think I've given every single episode of Golden Wind a 5 out of 5 thus far, and I think it's deserved it every single time. There are things I could nitpick about, like how sometimes the artwork and the animation is not quite as good as it is in other scenes, but that does not take away from my enjoyment of this series overall for its incredibly weird and wacky characters and the coolest anime powers that I have ever seen. I'm saying it here right now. There's a lot of action anime that I like, but when it comes to the creativity of the action scenes and the powers and how they're used, no one does it like JoJo. 5 out of 5 for me. If any of you did watch the episode, tell me what you thought about it in the comment section below and what you hope to see from the rest of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure Golden Wind. Thank you all for watching this review. I'll see you all next time. And as always, stay down now, baby.